Dr. Samuel J. Michalowski of Zurich, Switzerland. This anarthros, or use without the article, construction does not mean what the definite article, a, means in English. It is monstrous to translate the phrase, the word was a god. Dr. Paul L. Kaufman of Portland, Oregon. The Jehovah's Witnesses people evidence an abysmal ignorance of the basic tenets of Greek grammar in their mistranslation of John 1:1. Dr. Charles L. Feinberg of La Mirada, California. I can assure you that the rendering which the Jehovah's Witnesses give John 1:1 is not held by any reputable Greek scholar. Dr. James L. Boyer of Winona Lake, Indiana. I have never heard of or read of any Greek scholar who would have agreed to the interpretation of this verse insisted upon by the Jehovah's Witnesses. And then later on, Dr. Boyer says, I have never encountered one of them who had any knowledge of the Greek language. And then Dr. Walter R. Martin, who did not teach Greek but had studied the language. I think he had 6 semesters of New Testament Greek, if I remember correctly. He says, the translation a god instead of God is erroneous and unsupported by any Greek scholarship, ancient or contemporary, and is a translation rejected by all recognized scholars of the Greek language, many of whom are not even Christians, and cannot fairly be said to be biased in favor of the Orthodox contention. Okay, so he says the translation, then it has ... an ellipsis, a god instead of God. And what he's saying here, Dr. Martin, is that the Greek scholars who aren't even Christians will admit that that is a false translation. So people that don't follow Jesus and believe that Jesus is God and follow him as their Savior, even they will admit that on the basis of language, that's a bad translation. Dr. William Barclay of the University of Glasgow in Scotland. The deliberate distortion of truth by this sect seen in their New Testament translation, John 1:1 is translated, the Word was a God, a translation which is grammatically impossible. It is abundantly clear that a sect which can translate the New Testament like that is intellectually dishonest. Dr. F.F. Bruce of the University of Manchester, England. Much is made by Arian amateur grammarians of the omission of the definite article with God in the phrase, and the Word was God. Such an omission is common with nouns in a predicative construction. A God would be totally indefensible. Barclay and Bruce are generally regarded as as Great Britain's leading Greek scholars. Both have New Testament translations in print. So when he's talking about Arians, that has nothing to do with Adolf Hitler and the Third Reich. That's speaking of in church history. The Arians, you may have heard of the Council of Nicaea. The Arians wanted to have Jesus, they spoke of Jesus as being a man or at least non-divine, and I think they actually said he was a human being. So that is a little bit different from what the Jehovah's Witnesses say, but they agree with the Arians that Jesus was not God. No, I guess the Arians did believe that Jesus was more than a man. But at any rate, the thinking of the Jehovah's Witnesses is similar to that of the Arians. Okay, so they were some heretics in 325, I guess, is when Arian controversy was breaking out, and you may have heard the expression Athanasius against the world. Athanasius was the person who defended the deity of Christ and the doctrine of the Trinity at that time, and the Ecumenical Council at Nicaea rejected Arianism, although it was quite popular in those days. Thus, Athanasius against the world, because everybody was an Arian, except for him, more or less. Okay, so let's focus back in here. Dr. Ernest C. Caldwell of the University of Chicago, quote, "A definite predicate nominative has the article when it follows the verb. It does not have the article when it precedes the verb. This statement cannot be regarded as strange in the prologue of the Gospel, which reaches its climax in the confession of Thomas." And Thomas, doubting Thomas, says in this climax of Jesus, "My Lord and my God," in John 20, verse 28. Dr. Philip B. Harner of Heidelberg College, the verb preceding the anarthrous predicate would probably mean that the Logos was a god or a divine being of some kind belonging to the general category of theos, but as a distinct being from ho-theos in the form that John actually uses the word theos in places. The verb preceding an anarthrous predicate would probably mean that the Logos, Jesus, the Word, was a god or a divine being of some kind belonging to the general category of theos, but as a distinct being from ho-theos in the form that John actually uses the word theos is placed at the beginning for emphasis. Okay, so it seems like he's coming a little bit closer to the Jehovah's Witness view, Dr. Harner, but he is saying that Jesus is fully divine. He's not ho-theos, he's not God, that is God the Father, but he is divine, and the whole point of the Jehovah's Witnesses saying that he's a God with a little g is that the Jehovah's Witnesses are monotheists. They believe that really there's only one God, so they're denying the divinity of Jesus, but Harner is affirming it. At least that is the teaching of John chapter 1 verse 1. Dr. J. Johnson of California State University, Long Beach. No justification whatsoever for translating theos and ha-logos as the Word was a God. There is no syntactical parallel to Acts 28 verse 6, where there is a statement of indirect discourse. John 1:1 is direct. And then Dr. Johnson says, "I am neither a Christian nor a Trinitarian." Dr. Eugene A. Nida, head of the Translations Department of the American Bible Society, ABS, with regard to John 1:1, there is, of course, a complication simply because the New World Translation was apparently done by persons who did not take seriously the syntax of the Greek. And that was Dr. Eugene was responsible for the Good News Bible. He was in charge of Good News for Modern Man, or the today's English version. Dr. B.F. Westcourt. Now, Westcourt is very important in the history of the New Testament in Greek, but we'll have to leave that for the next video. Thank you.